Hello and good morning, and welcome to our 2021 salary guide launch. For those of you who don't know us, we're Harnham. I'm joined by my colleagues here, and we're the largest data and analytics recruiter worldwide. We're here to discuss the key findings of the 2021 salary guide, go through some of the interesting things that we've seen. Obviously, it's been an interesting year, let's put it that way, and some of the data reflects that. So we'll unpack some of the insights that we've got in the guide. It can be downloaded in the link in the video from now. So please do, grab the guide if you want to have a read through whilst you're listening to us, or if you just want to grab it. Then please do that. For those of you, who are joining with interest in our European and USA guides, there are going to be launch events for those two on tomorrow and Thursday, respectively. So we're here to discuss the UK guide today. If you've got any questions, then please do pop them in the chat. We'll try and get through as many as we can, but within the time limit. So if we can't get to your question, then drop us a message afterwards and reach out on LinkedIn or on email. But yeah, just to introduce my colleagues. So we've got Talitha and Ross here.
Hi everyone, I'm Talitha. I manage two of our permanent teams at Harnham. So I manage our digital analytics team, where we specialise in web analytics and programmatics roles. And I also manage our marketing and insight team, where we specialise in customer insight, marketing analytics, data strategy and CRM positions.
And I'm Ross. I manage a couple of teams here as well. So that's our data and tech team, which is a few different teams which cover data engineering, BI, data governance, just anything around the infrastructure that's needed to bring data into businesses, and also our data science team.
Cool. And I'm Dan, and all things contract is what I look after. So yeah, it's been an interesting year on that front. So we'll have a little chat about some of the headlines in contract later on as well.
Great. And Talitha, you're going to introduce the guide.
Yeah, so this is the 10th year of our Harnham salary guide, which is obviously huge. I think we did the salary guide launch this time last year, also remotely, and I did not expect that we would be doing this remotely again this year, but here we are. So this year we've actually had a record number of people involved and respondents to our salary survey. So a huge thank you to everyone that has taken part. Every year when we're collating our salary guide, we take data from a number of different sources. So as I just mentioned, we run an independent survey. This year we had over 4,600 respondents globally, which is obviously huge. We also analysed our own placement data, which is all anonymized. And then we also take data from the market and from various different job boards to kind of understand what's going on. So all of that data is put together. And this year, our data was analysed in collaboration with our diversity partner, who are Into Science. So if you don't know who they are, they're a really interesting organisation who focus on promoting diversity within STEM subjects. And so they supported us in analysing the data this year. As I mentioned, this is the 10th year of our salary guide, and in celebration of a decade of data, throughout the guide this year, you'll find commentary that highlights kind of changes. Obviously, you've just seen on the video at the beginning, differences in the market from kind of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. So you'll find that throughout the survey. I guess to kick off, Ross, do you want to kick us off with discussing the topic of last year?
So unsurprisingly, the biggest thing that's impacted the job market over the past 12 months has been COVID. The last guide, we gathered data from 6 weeks before and 6 weeks after social distancing was enforced, and everything was very new at that point. So it's kind of the initial reaction. This year, we've had a much bigger overview with the longer term impacts of the pandemic on the data analytics job market. And we've gathered a number of different data points around that. So that's all in the guide. I think what's what's really great to see from that information is how positive a lot of the company's reactions and people's reactions has been to the pandemic. So we asked whether people felt they were their companies were prepared for remote working, and actually 85% of people said they were, which is great. And then we also asked whether they thought that their companies communicated changes in the business as well to them, and 74% of people thought that was good as well. So a lot of the industry is clearly reacting in a very positive way to the pandemic. On the other side of the coin, 69% of people had seen their hours impacted. So I'm not sure if that means they're just working more because their office is right there and they're having to put more time in, and there are challenges around any of the technology. And 16% of people did take a pay cut during the pandemic, although 2/3 of those people have gone back to normal. So some interesting stats there. But Talitha or Dan, what's been the feedback from your markets about how people are feeling about their company's reaction to the pandemic?
I think in general, across the areas that I look after, I think this might well be seen across the entire market, but I think people were fairly understanding if everyone was thrown into this situation where no one really knew what to do. I suppose a lot of the areas that we recruit for, people are already quite well versed working from home, because so many businesses in this industry were already able to offer it maybe once or twice a week, which I think makes sense as to why 85% of people felt like they were kind of well prepared for remote working. I think there was probably a time kind of mid-pandemic last year when obviously everyone's a bit tired of everything naturally, and so there's various different frustrations. But I think in general, because it was such a strange situation that we were in and kind of still are in, people were almost kind of just happy to be able to keep in something and have a role that they were playing. I definitely think the piece around working hours being impacted makes complete sense, because I think it's a lot easier to be able to just log on at any time that you need to, because you're at home. And I suppose also the fact that you couldn't really do anything last year probably tied into that.
I thought the stat around the communication within the business was really interesting, actually, because I mean, we all experienced it, right? There was a sense of kind of panic and uncertainty in a way at the beginning of lockdown. It feels like such a long time ago now. It's amazing that it's only 12 months ago. I mean, I remember in the build up and shortly after the kind of the initial lockdown last year, speaking to a number of my contacts, and there was kind of this game of chicken in terms of like, do we stick or do we twist? Do we lead from the front in terms of communication and therefore policy in terms of making sure everyone works from home, furlough, all this kind of thing. And there were so many different interpretations of what best practice looked like at the time. It's funny how everyone spoke of and got tired of talking about the new normal, but things have sort of established and normalized now. There was a lot of people waiting for government-led instruction, which makes sense. But it was interesting to see actually the amount of senior operational leaders in the market, because I went and spoke to quite a few actually initially, because I was curious to see what people were doing in terms of what they were communicating and things like that. And actually, there were many who are actually being proactive in their approach, which probably is what reflects in that piece of data there. So proactively, delivering sometimes probably bad news, sometimes good news, but difficult messages, and managing their teams accordingly. So I feel like that's really interesting, and I think that reflects in some of the other data that we'll get to later on around job security and things like that. As well. Also, I mean, people have stopped doing them now, but all the kind of pastoral care that companies suddenly got really involved in at the time. I don't know, Ross and Tally, if you remember any interesting things that your clients were doing, but them posting out gifts and doing quizzes, death by quizzes it was for a period of time, wasn't it? But working for a company definitely changed for a few months' time.
Yeah. definitely, and I think we experienced all the quizzes as well at our company. I think everyone was doing that for a time. But I think one thing that, and we will talk about this later, but I mean, recently we haven't even heard of many people looking to leave because of their company's response to COVID or because of where they're at the moment, and that's all very rarely a factor now. It may be briefly for a couple of months after the initial response. We were definitely seeing that, maybe because of the industries that were more affected, such as travel, rather than other sectors. But after that initial period settled down, from September onwards, it's not been a massive factor for most of the candidates we've been working with. Definitely when they're looking to move jobs. I think we've got a question from James, who's asked, saying it's interesting that regarding those who had to take a pay cut, albeit reinstated, are there any industry trends underpinning this? I don't know about you guys, but what I've noticed with the people taking pay cuts is over, particularly last year, it was almost always by badly affected industries, so such as travel, where it's very difficult to operate in a COVID environment. But did you guys notice any other trends regarding, where the pay cuts were being taken and why?
I think travel, I definitely agree with. I think in some agencies, potentially there was impact if they were partnered with clients in travel space, for example, or hospitality. There might have been some impact there. But I think as a whole, it's from various different sectors that have been impacted. I think it's leveled out again now that there's more confidence in the market.
I found it really interesting, the stat around the kind of the lack of, not lack of, but the future planning. It was very short-termist thinking in that period of time, and actually that's reflected in the data, where I think only 26% of people have actually discussed the long-term work from home planning with their manager. Obviously, remote working has become almost expected now, but there's still a lot of people out there on the market who haven't actually thought about what about life after lockdown and life after COVID. I know that I remember Ross, that frustrated you with some of the situations that we had at the time, where actually some people, they needed that information to accept offers and to feel confident moving from one job to another. How do you think that's been recently?
Well, yeah, I still think it's the same. So what we're hearing on the market from almost all clients that we work with and businesses is that there will be a strong element of working from home as part of the company strategy, but we're unsure exactly what that will look like and how that will work. And that's the line for almost everyone, including like onboarding new starters. So it will definitely be interesting to see how that played out. And actually, in the data and analytics space, from the data, the people on average want to work remotely from 3 days a week. So that's a majority of their time from home, and that's the consensus across the market. So and we're going to come on to that later with motivations and why people are moving and why they're leaving, but that's definitely a big factor in the front of someone's mind. And it was actually the most desirable benefit that a company could offer on the market now that came back from the data. I think a lot of people, when they're applying for jobs, also like see it as a given that there'll be a strong element of working from home. And if someone doesn't offer any, or post-pandemic, it's almost a surprise. I don't know if you've seen that, Talitha.
Yeah, 100%. I think on both points that you both were talking about, I think there's a challenge for businesses, because I think given that everyone has worked from home for such a long period of time, you know, in that time, teams have changed, you've had new hires and so on. So I think there is an element of leaders within organisations, I think, will often want to try and encourage people to come in maybe 3 days a week as opposed to 3 days from home, so that you can build up that culture and that collaboration together, and then maybe move forward after that into like a slightly different split. I think the piece around not offering any flexibility will be quite detrimental to someone's to a business's hiring strategy, because anyone that I've spoken to that is still looking at 5 days a week has really struggled to be able to bring talent on board. I think because candidates, like, everyone's just lived such a different life for the last 18 months, and you know, kind of your motivations and things change of what you're after, and I think people will just naturally expect there's no need for them to be in 5 days a week, so they will want that flexibility for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we have a look at some of the data in terms of what the main reasons people have left their jobs during COVID, there's some really interesting points there. So Ross mentioned earlier that this is the third year in a row, right, that career progression is still key. You know, so whilst the importance of remote working, as you know, for people is increasing, I think a lot of people got that with the roles that they had. So actually, what was still, you know, paramount that people got in their career is career progression, and the fact that, you know, the data implies that that's one of the key reasons for people leaving their role last year shows the strength of the market, really, because people are still thinking about their careers, still thinking about progressing, and still have that ambition. Whereas, you know, you'd think if the market was negatively impacted, then people would feel less secure in their role and more likely to kind of bed down. And actually, you know, we dug out a stat that about 88% of the people that responded to the survey felt more or as secure as they did this time last year, which obviously we were in the build up to and just in the early stages of pandemic, so perhaps that's to be expected, but actually 88% is a really strong figure there, in my opinion. And yeah, so however, there was a little bit more hesitance to take a risk. So we saw the stat of people who were willing to leave for the right opportunity creep down from 74 to 68%. But people are obviously still looking to move for the right thing, largely speaking, and still thinking about their careers there. In terms of retaining talent on the market, stopping people leaving, or trends that you guys have seen, is there anything that jumps out?
I mean, stopping people from leaving is always been a big challenge in data and analytics, because and retention as a whole, because, you know, there's been, for the last 5 years plus now, it's been such a growing industry and there's been lots of opportunities out there. I think a lot of companies that are doing this successfully do have really clear career progression plans and learning opportunities for people to kind of grow on their careers at their kind of current companies. So they've been doing it well, and people are starting to look when they feel like they've learned a good amount from the role, particularly in the more technical markets that I work in. When you're speaking to candidates, almost always something they'll mention is looking for a new technical challenge, looking for learning a new tool, a new technology, and anything like this. Yeah, and when they're looking to move, again, it's all about the tech they can learn, what they're looking to do. Do people talk as much about technology and things like that in your market, Tally, and in Marketing Insight and Digital?
Yeah, 100%. I think I would echo what you'd say. Obviously, the tech that they're using is going to be different to what you're looking at. I think it's difficult across data. It's a challenge across data and analytics, because people tend to stay in role kind of in the survey this year, it was on average 2.5 years that people stayed in role before moving, which I think is actually a bit longer than what we've seen previously. I think tech, particularly in the areas that my teams recruit for, the actual impact of their work and the results of what they're seeing is really important to them. So by that I mean actually working on projects where they can see that they're going to have an impact and actually being able to make a difference, whether that's for a client or whether that's for a different stakeholder. That seems to be really key. And I think if people find they're in a role that they're not having any kind of achievement from, then that's quite frustrating. I think for businesses with retaining talent, I think, like we've just said, outside of things like salary, the biggest piece is talking to people about the journey that they're going on and where they're going and what else you can offer them. And I think that constant conversation has to be there. Because there's so many roles now, especially over the last few months, that have come up, and so many companies hiring that people are obviously getting spoken to all the time about different opportunities.
And I think just to add to that, not only are people getting spoken to and approached about more opportunities, the talent that's in teams now is getting access to a lot of opportunities, but actually the interview processes have changed as well. We discussed working from home plans and things like that, but actually, if you're a talented, in-demand data scientist, for example, you don't need to book out half a day to go and attend an interview anymore. People are able to interview for a lot more roles and get into a lot more processes as well, which again, it allows people to assess their options, be even more strategic than they were before, and really choose what's best for them, be slightly more selective, and maybe demand slightly more from their current employer as well, because they speak to more businesses now who are offering X, Y, Z. And that's maybe part and parcel with the world we live in now. We have had a few requests recently for face-to-face interviews, which is interesting to see those coming back, and I think there's potentially still a place for those in the process. But I think that's been a really interesting, that impacts the reason for people leaving. They simply have the ability to interview more and therefore assess more options. And maybe attend interviews to roles they would have previously not been interested in, but now it's a half an hour call at the end of the day. They're not doing anything else, just log on and do it. And for me, I think that's one of the key reasons that's driven people to go as well.
Just a reminder, everyone, that feel free to get involved and ask us any questions. I think there's a chat where you can post questions and we'll pick those up, or as many as we can, later in the call. And there's a link below where you can download the guide. So if you want to find out more information on the guide or see some of the data that we're discussing, just click the link and download it, because that is live now. The next topic we were going to come on to has been a massive talking point in data analytics for particularly the last 2 years, and something that we're quite passionate about, which is gender diversity. So Talitha, would you like to introduce that topic?
Yeah, so I think we release our diversity report in September this year. So we'll actually have quite a lot of detail, not only on gender diversity, but across the entire kind of diversity space, with a lot of information around kind of the trends that we've seen over the last year. But I think the gender diversity piece was actually quite interesting in the survey this year, because there were some real mixed results with what came through. So overall, we saw in the industry the number of females actually decrease from 30% to 28%. So I think there's obviously work to be done there, and we can talk about in a minute a couple of the areas where we're seeing kind of businesses try and tackle this. But marketing and insights still saw the highest gender diversity split, but that again decreased from 42% in our survey last year down to 39% this year. Data and technology, I know, was the lowest in terms of diversity, so it's kind of stayed at 22%. And then we had in digital, which is actually quite refreshing, we actually saw the number of females within digital analytics from those surveyed increase from 31 to 37%. So that was a real positive step. I think, as Ross mentioned, we have a lot of people speaking to us about diversity and how they can particularly focus on gender diversity and how to increase that within their teams. I think it will probably be more interesting looking at next year's data, because then it will be a year later after the impact of this year, where things like work flexibility have been obviously talked about far more than they normally are, and we can see how maybe that's helped to increase, because I think being flexible and being able to work around kind of work-life balance has definitely been something that will hopefully be able to push through and increase the number of females in senior positions and just generally within the space. Ross, have you seen any particular trends or anything maybe within data and tech in the last year that's been different as people try and focus on it.
I think what's really interesting about gender diversity in the market at the moment is it has been a talking point for a couple of years now, and almost every business we speak to is trying to tackle it in some way, but the numbers aren't like increasing like massively within the space, and obviously it's a slow journey, and it's going to be something where it's a challenge. And in the markets I recruit in, so for example data engineering, there's very few female candidates available, and it's a real challenge for lots of businesses to have diverse teams, because it's just accepted now, and it's just true that the diverse team is likely to perform better just from a business point of view, as well as being the right thing to do. I mean, it's obviously a big question. I'll throw it out to both of you because it could be quite hard to answer. But why, when a lot of companies are trying to do positive action for diversity in data and analytics, what do you think's stopping like big changes in the wider market at the moment?
It's a big question, Ross. I think, okay, so I think there's a few different points. I think the first point that in general, perhaps STEM subjects maybe weren't subjects that females were always going to go and study at university. And so I think there's been maybe like the stream of talent coming through has obviously always been more kind of male dominant, if you like. So I know Into Science, who I mentioned at the beginning that we partner with, that's one of their huge initiatives, is kind of encouraging people through right from a young age coming through into STEM subjects, which I think will help open up the pool of open up the pool of talent coming through. So I think that's a massive thing, because obviously if people haven't been exposed to it 10 years ago and starting to come through university and starting out in data and analytics roles, then that's probably why we're not seeing so many females in these different positions now. I think previously some of the blockers that I've seen for females within the areas that I recruit for are the lack of flexibility, which I know I just touched on, being there for them, to take on quite senior roles and also manage, different things that are going on outside of work. So I think the fact that now businesses can be so much more flexible, I think that will hopefully be a massive aid. And that's why I think looking at next year's data will be really interesting, because we'll have had like nearly 2 years of flexible working and being in place, which hopefully I think will support it.
I think one interesting thing that we might see over the next 12 months, perhaps 18 months, is actually, I don't know if there's official stats about it, but the COVID baby boom. I know that Ross and I have both had children in that window as well, not together, but actually there's going to be a lot of women and dads to an extent as well, but there's going to be a lot of mums returning to their jobs. They might not want to return to their job in the form that it was that they left, because when they left, a lot could have changed in the world. And actually, how a company is going to pivot and adapt to those situations as well. Obviously, that's a macro topic. It's bigger than just the data and analytics market. But actually, in a talent short market anyway, where finding diverse teams is difficult, and so actually retaining your talent is super important in the market. Our company's going to adapt to this change of circumstance down the line as well, in terms of actually how they integrate people back into the teams and the companies, and continue helping them to feel valued and supported and developed like everyone else. I think that's going to be a huge topic, and I can see a lot of people not wanting to return to their previous employer when they come back because of exactly this topic. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one to keep an eye on, and certainly one where it'd be cool if we could collect some data about that and talk about that for next year's survey.
Yeah, and I think just on the STEM subjects point, that's where data and tech, like my team, are really impacted, because typically people have computer science degrees or IT degrees, and those kind of topics have been previously massively dominated by men at university. So that's where the problem starts. So although everyone's looking for a diverse team, there's only a limited number of candidates on the market. I think maybe one of the reasons that the digital analytics and marketing areas do well is because they're maybe slightly more accessible for people that haven't done really technical degrees, so they can get people from broader backgrounds. Whereas if you're being a data engineer or a data scientist, typically you would need that experience. Which actually brings me on to a question from Amin to tackle quickly. So he's asked if you want to switch from academia to industry in the field of AI, then what is the key to success to find a position as a data scientist? Now, it's obviously quite a challenging move. But what we find is make sure your skills are applicable for industry, and you're trying to apply those in your academic studies. So things like good programming skills, good knowledge of like statistics and machine learning that would be used in data science. Like, try and find out exactly what businesses need, and then try and apply them to your academics, and then you can make the transition easier. That one great thing about data science is they are, as an industry, it's really open for people from research to make the move over. So apply to jobs, talk to people, talk about what you've done and see how it's applicable. But at the same time, try and, assess what's in industry. So the next, we've got another quick question as well, from Sahib, for diversity and inclusion. Were there any interesting trends for minority representation, especially in senior positions? I think just to pick up on that quickly, we do a diversity guide, which is separate from the salary guide, and we cover lots of detail on different diversity topics. We have the 2020 guide available on our website, and you can find it online, but we've also got a full detailed diversity guide coming out in September. So that's going to be your best source of information for that. Just to move on to our next topic, we were going to talk about the salaries in the market. And what was really interesting in this data is you would have thought big economic impact of COVID over the last year, salary increases would be down, but actually they were on the increase. So on average, the increased salary sought when moving jobs was 20% across data and analytics, and the average achieved was 20%. So the expectations were in line with what people were getting. Again, I'll throw it open to the group, but why do we think that is, and why do we think the salaries are continuing to increase and by a quicker rate this year?
I wasn't sure who was going to go then. I think it's obviously year on year we do see that things increase. I think people are very aware, businesses are very aware of the investment they need to make in order to bring on strong talent. And I think there's been a huge recognition across the industry, particularly in the second half of the pandemic. I think businesses started to realise all the different areas across the data space that they needed to carry on investing in. And I think they're keen to kind of go with that, and that's why that we're seeing this increase of the 20% and that actually being achieved, because I think a lot of people are aware that if they want to secure good talent, they have to be willing to kind of hit the expectations of candidates.
I think one of the impacts of COVID as well is actually just the increase in value on analytics within organizations and the decrease of gut feel decision making. So actually, in uncertain times, certainly this is what we found. Well, I found this in the contract market. Decision makers became more senior, budget holders and finance teams got involved in final decisions when perhaps they wouldn't have done previously, which generally implies a greater scrutiny has been spent on expenditure, and there's a reduced appetite for risk within most organizations. So actually, in an environment like that, it makes sense that analytics, data science, machine learning is all placed on a pedestal, really, and increased in importance. So actually, I'd say data and analytics, broadly speaking, is one of the few industries that continue to thrive and grow despite everything that was going on, because actually the work that the guys that we place and others on the market are doing, the value that they add to their companies is huge, and companies aren't in a position to take, or weren't in a position to take, risks when previously they would do. So actually attracting and retaining strong analytics talent is as important as it ever has been. And I think that reflects in candidate expectations as well, and why the pay rises don't seem to be impacted, really. I'd say that kind of contextual element to what people are doing and how they value analytics within an organization played a huge impact.
And just generally, from like a qualitative point of view, how, I mean, we've kind of touched on it a few times, but maybe Tali, this is for you, but how is the market at the moment, and kind of how busy is it versus like pre-COVID times?
I would say exceptionally busy. Probably the best way to describe it. I think obviously last year was clearly a very different scenario, but I think even pre-COVID, I can't remember when there's been as much confidence in the market with regards to hiring, and that it's been as busy with roles coming through, which I think is obviously a great sign of actually how valued these roles are in these spaces for so many different businesses. But yes, there are a lot of roles, I would say, across all the different sectors that we recruit for. It has been extremely busy, which I suppose has also contributed to why candidates are actually typically, not everyone, obviously different scenarios, but typically seeing that they are like hitting that 20% increase, because businesses are aware that if they want to secure the best talent, it's very competitive, and they need to go ahead and hit that. I do think that the salary is a big piece, but I actually think it's the combination of salary, remote working, and training that's really getting people to move. And I think the biggest difference I've seen is that when making a decision, the number of questions and the detail that a candidate needs, which is completely fair, is a lot more than I've ever seen before. And the kind of thought process that's going into it, I personally think in the areas that I cover, it is a lot kind of more intensive than it was previously. I don't know if you've seen that, Ross, actually, with data science and data and tech.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of similar to the last couple of years, really, in the salary increase is almost a given when moving jobs, and it's not every situation, right? And sometimes people do take matches, or sideways moves for various reasons, but the salary, like, people just expect a salary increase that's good, and they, with options on the table, they'll probably get that, typically, with the market how it is at the moment. But what causes someone to go for one role over another isn't necessarily like £2,000 or £3,000 on a salary here and there. It's more those extra two pieces of like training, working from home, and wider cultural reasons why someone is going to go for a job and accept an offer ahead of other companies. But the salary does need to be there as well, to secure the best talent. Another thing that was interesting as well was the average bonus was down 10%, down to 10%, sorry, from 15% last year. I think, considering how busy the market is, you'd think that was surprising, but maybe a lot of bonuses were held last year. I don't know.
Or possibly linked to company performance.
Yeah. And any other reasons, guys, that you think that might be the case?
I think it'll be probably as a result of last year. Company performance would have been different to what would have been anticipated, which I think then would have had the impact on the bonus. And maybe people have, instead of necessarily given a bonus, have looked at salary increases or investing the money into hiring, potentially.
Yeah, and I think companies are investing a lot now into building for the rest of this year and next year as well, and they're looking at growth, and I would expect that the bonuses would go up next year and the year after as a result of that. I think this is a good time to move on to the contract market.
Quick chat about the contract market. And we can't talk about the last 12 months within the contract market without addressing IR35 in some state, in some form. It was the big topic of conversation within contract last year or early this year. And actually, the advice that was generally given to a lot of people by a lot of people was about getting your ducks in a row early doors. And actually, we were quite pleasantly surprised to see that quite a lot of certainly the businesses that Harnham have partnered with, but also others from contractors that we speak to on a regular basis, it was starting to come into place. And actually, we had like a full start 12 months ago, and there was a lot more confidence in current employers and in processes that were going into this time around. So there's about 72% of the contractors that we surveyed, they felt that the IR35 was handled well within the company that they work for, which was if you look at all the chat on LinkedIn and places like that, that was a surprising stat for me. I thought it was going to be a slightly lower percentage. Generally, what we saw from the market is initially the appetite to hire contractors was reduced in the early stages of lockdown, which resulted in a lot fewer jobs being recruited for. Some unfortunate offers being withdrawn, and even contractors being served notice or not being extended around about the early time of lockdown. So that's really the impact of COVID. But we've seen almost a V-shaped recovery really, in that the market's bounced back and is incredibly strong. But what's pleasing to see is that actually the topic of IR35, it's being factored in early on into the conversation. So actually, before time is wasted, people are asking, has the role been assessed, and do we need to make plans in terms of increasing the rate for those who are being asked to use an umbrella company or work inside, and vice versa. Are they actually properly assessing the roles up front before interviews are being booked in? And that's good. So day rate increases have dropped. We're seeing about a quarter of contractors last year, in last year's guide, got a day rate increase when moving to their next contract. It's dropped to about 16% this time. So it's not uncommon to move for the same rate, if not slightly less. And I guess that's to be expected when part of the year it was quite job short, and actually there were a lot of people on the market looking to pick up contracts. However, I'd be interested to see what next year's guide says in response to that particular statistic, because I feel like that might be one that changes, where certainly we felt with the roles that we've been hiring for recently, the talent shortage that we are used to in the analytics market is back again. So I wonder if the rates being offered are going to reflect in that. Another really interesting stat was actually that about 1 in 5 contractors are getting offered perm jobs at the end of their contracts now. Again, is IR35 to blame for that? Is it to do with actual job security? Are contractors asking for permanent jobs perhaps, or being more open to it? The stats say again about 20% are planning to go perm or are happy to go perm at the end of their current contract, whereas about 25% were actively looking to leave at the end, at the end of their contract and go somewhere else, perhaps again to do with IR35. In summary, though, it's been a year of kind of change within the market, but I think we're stabilizing into to use the phrase, the new normal. I think people are now getting used to IR35, getting used to what they expect from an employer and from a contract, and we're starting to see some form of normality resume to the market, which is really good to see. And I think that the key statistic, and on average, when we surveyed a contractor, 30% of the contractors that we surveyed were actually part of a team of contractors. So companies employing that use of a flexible workforce solution effectively to rebuild their teams after COVID, or maybe there's been a pivot in strategic direction and therefore new skills are required. And we've seen that appetite for contractors really coming back strongly on the market, and that's resulted in the amount of roles that we've had come through and things like that as well. So I don't know if anyone wants to ask me any questions on the contract market. If not, feel free to give me a shout afterwards if you're watching and listening. But yeah, remember, you can ask questions generally if you're watching this as well. You can download the guide now as well, so get involved. Let us know what you think, and feel free to shoot any questions. We can't really talk about the market though without having a drill into the technology itself. So yeah, keen to see, I think, Ross from the data team, keen to see your thoughts on the tech side of the market at the moment.
Yeah, so every year we survey top tech that's being used in the industry, and data and analytics is obviously a massive space for different specialisms, but it's always interesting to see what's being used the most. I think in 2016 I saw Pentaho mentioned, which from the video at the start of the chat, and haven't heard that in a long time. So it changes quickly. This year with the top tech have come through with specifically Power BI at the top, which is interesting. Definitely, we'll come on to that why in a minute. Python has come through as second. AWS is in third. SQL is fourth, and Google Analytics has kind of come through as fifth. So that's seen SaaS gone off the list for I think the first year. It's not been in the top 5 at all. And aside from that, it's been very similar to last year with AWS being the new technology or cloud provider sneaking in there as well. I guess in your markets, Tally, I imagine Python is been massively increased in seeing it coming up on requirements. Have you seen that?
Yeah, definitely. Particularly obviously predominantly on the marketing and insight team that I manage. The roles that we see come through will normally always have a Python requirement or are, but Python I would definitely say is far more popular for clients and candidates. I thought it was funny that SAS is now no longer in the top 5, although it's not really a surprise because I can't remember the last time that I really spoke about that with a client at length. So I think it's no surprise that SAS has come off. I think sometimes more recently, as we're seeing kind of digital analytics change and requirements change, we have started to see some roles coming through where they would, businesses are ideally looking for someone with some form of open source tech as well, like R or Python. So yeah, I don't think it's a huge surprise that Python's like up number 2, because I think every sector that we recruit for is looking for credit risk as well. They'll often hire for candidates within that space too.
Yeah, to add to that, on a contract perspective, I think we've seen quite a lot of cloud migrations. We've seen quite a lot of, basically, companies are interacting with their customers differently. They need, new apps, new products being built, things like that, where, they might be trading online where they hadn't done previously and things like that. And we've seen that reflected in a lot of the technical requirements that we've had. So, data-driven software engineers, cloud engineers, architects, these sorts of roles have been really, really busy on a contract side where companies are scaling quick teams in response to the market. So if we just jump into a quick question from Nikant, which I think is a really interesting one. So he's asked, how do you see the big surge in data and analytics roles impacting the market for more traditional market and research insights roles, but particularly interested to know about that at a director and executive level. So what are your thoughts, guys?
I presume what you're kind of getting getting at, Nikant, is are we seeing that we're a reduction in maybe roles across market research and insight at that level? I think it depends on the business and exactly what they're doing, but I would definitely say that we're still seeing kind of quite a big influx of roles, head of insight and director of insight. I think it depends on what data science means to a company and what they see it as. But traditionally for us, a head of data science would probably be involved in potentially more exploratory work and more work leaning towards AI, machine learning, whereas a head of insight would be more towards potentially consumer data, but more of those kind of traditional customer insight pieces, which maybe not as advanced. So I think for most businesses, it's kind of two separate functions underneath the wider data organization. So not necessarily seeing those roles decrease. Ross, I don't know whether you would agree with that.
Yeah, I think so. I think with the data science and analytics roles, there is a big surge in it, but that's kind of still been the case for a long time. From what I understand, and we wouldn't. Well, personally, I don't work in market research area that much, but there's still definitely a need for that and a demand for that, and businesses still want those people and need those teams. It's just maybe a slightly different skill set where it wouldn't necessarily transfer from that skill set into like a data science role, because it's much more like technically focused and much more research focused. So they're not necessarily that linked in terms of what they're doing day to day. Just on going back to a couple of the technologies, I think obviously Python is interesting because it's such a versatile tool. So it's going to be really common for Talitha's team in the marketing and insight or the marketing insight candidates that they'll be using that for stats modeling. But then in one of my teams, the data engineering team, they'll also be using Python for a lot of their coding. And we see a complete majority of data engineering roles, probably around 80%, looking for Python as the main programming language, using it in a completely different context. And relating to Power BI as well, which is like top of the tech stack, the business intelligence candidates that we're working with are often using Python for a bit of scripting here and there, or acquiring data from different sources. So because the language is so versatile, it's really not a shock that it's coming at number 2, and I wouldn't be surprised if next year it's in number 1. And I think another thing that's worth talking about is with Power BI being at the top of the tools, it's again something that's used both by analysts and kind of BI developers in building reports, and it's just indicating a wider move away from more traditional reporting tools like SSRS and things like that to genuine interactive visualization tools such as Power BI, Tableau, and I'm actually surprised not to see Looker on there. I think next year we're getting more and more clients embedding or businesses embedding Looker and looking for people with those skills. I wouldn't be shocked if we see that on the list.
Ross, there's been some interest in data science tools as well in the question. So, shout out to Colleen, who's asking about auto machine learning tools. But any trends that you're seeing in the tech for data science?
Not necessarily in the tech that's being used. I think the two things that we're seeing in data science is the requirement for full stack data scientists, so people who can do the research work and do the more statistical, mathematical side of data science, work with machine learning and things like that, but then can take the solutions they develop and then embed them into a business and actually develop like a product that can be used as part of that. So both doing the engineering work and the data science work on top of that, and that has been a massive requirement. Again, most companies will be using Python for that work, and it's not a surprise that's been really common. The second thing, and this probably ties into the the AWS work, and this is true of data engineering as well, is having operation ML ops experience. So being able to work with tools like Kubernetes or Docker and essentially DevOps tools to be able to embed those solutions into the infrastructure as well. That's seen as really valuable for the business, because the big trend in data science now, and it has been true for the last 2 years, is it needs to add value, and people need to be able to use the tools. It can't just be cool research that's being done on the side and it doesn't go anywhere. So those two things are adding a lot of value to teams, and as a result, companies are definitely looking for that on top of the other machine learning and research work that companies need.
We've had another question actually just coming in. I know we're coming towards the end of the session. Ross, I think this one might be more tailored towards you. It kind of links actually to what you just mentioned a little bit, I think. It's from Jairan. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, but sorry if I didn't. So they've asked, how do you think traditional data analyst, scientist and engineering roles are being impacted by the big increase in all-in analytics tools that bring those separate roles under one software tool?
Yeah.
I suppose that actually links into kind of what you just said, that businesses do actually need people that do know what they're doing, as opposed to just using like a one hit wonder kind of thing.
Yeah, well, interestingly, that's quite a technical question, but I think I can tackle it. So, interestingly, there's a few different tools that do this, and Looker as well has a full stack, including like ML capabilities, and we're seeing people a lot of companies use like Fivetran with Looker and DBT with various like data warehouses, with a view that a lot of it's automated, so in people without the technical skills, just with commercial skills, can use the product in the end. I think the way that's actually impacted the market at the moment, if anything, is it's had a need for more kind of technical people. And for example, it's mentioned in the guide in the data and tech section, but the rise of the analytics engineer or BI engineer, who is actually building these systems from scratch. And I definitely don't think it's resulted in fewer analytics jobs. If anything, the companies have needed more people to build these systems, and it's just ended up with a new type of job in this market. And we've seen no decrease in demand in any of the other areas as a result of that at this point. So if anything, it's just going to get more people involved in data rather than fewer people with careers in data, I think, and just allow the business users to use data more on top of the analysts. Yeah.
Good answer.
Thanks. I hope it was
right. We have time for one last question, which is from Lawrence, which I guess actually will be a nice way to wrap up, because I think all three of us can give a bit of insight into his question. So Lawrence has asked, what advice would you give someone trying to break into the industry, especially in today's climate? So Dan, do you want to share some wisdom?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it depends on what stage you're looking to break into the industry, I suppose. If you are, looking at A level, for example, thinking about what you're going to do with your life and your career, then definitely you want to put yourself into STEM topics where the skills you learn are going to be replicated. If you're a bit later on, then for me, it's all about learning at the early stage of your career. I spent a lot of my career in actually recruiting within the digital analytics space, and actually the amount of people that found themselves in analytics maybe later on in their career, there's tons. So I'd say learn as many hard skills as you can and apply yourself in as many different ways as possible. But also use the data like we provide in this guide and things like that to strategically pick the kind of skills that you want to learn. So, for example, Python, right? If you've got the chance to get your hands on some Python, clearly there's loads of employers who are after it. So prioritize that over other things. But then you might try it and it's not for you, and there's plenty other types of roles within the analytics market. So yeah, I'd say use the data available personally.
Ross, what are your thoughts? Oh, I think.
Sorry, I'm having a couple of technical issues of mine, so hopefully you can hear me. But the thing I'd advise for a more technical market is things like building up a GitHub profile and trying to get like examples of code and things you've done in your spare time to show that you're kind of applying skills. If anything, it shows what you can do with coding languages, but the second thing is, it shows that you're proactive and you're trying to learn and you're keen, and often it can give you the edge when applying for an entry level role. And that any kind of projects you can do in your spare time where you're applying the kind of skills that the industry needs, and if you can showcase that on a website like GitHub or Stack Overflow, that's amazing, and companies really value that for someone coming in at an entry level. So that'd be my kind of tip for people in that position.
Yeah, I think the only other piece I would add to both those points would be, and I realise this hasn't been possible for the last year, but there's lots of different meetups and kind of organisations across the industry that you can get involved with for free, and events where you can go along and kind of meet different people with a similar mindset and kind of just get an idea about the different roles that exist. Obviously, those things I would imagine are going to start hopefully being able to happen again in the next kind of few months. And I think kind of putting yourself out there and going to some of those can be a really good way to start out in the space and learn kind of the different roles, the different organisations that are hiring and so on, to get you started. Well, thank you everyone who's joined us today. I hope it's been a good session, and there's been lots of opportunity to kind of learn a bit more about what's gone on in the last year. I know we had quite a few questions that we weren't able to get to this time, so please feel free to drop us a note either individually on our LinkedIn's or reach out via our website, and we can help and answer any other questions that you might have. Our next live is tomorrow for the launch of our European guide. So please do tune in then. You can find out some more insight as to what's happened over the last year across all the other countries that we recruit for. And as I mentioned, please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions on the salary guide, or you're looking to make a hire or looking to make a move and would need some support. And thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Great speaking to you.